Order, order. Derek Thomas to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to move this House has considered loneliness and isolation in the elderly and vulnerable people. Imagine a room, Mr. Sharma, of people of all ages and demographics. In this gathering, there will be vulnerable people. It's reasonable to say a small child is vulnerable. People with visual and hearing impairments could be described as vulnerable. People with severe learning disabilities or lifelong debilitating conditions could be described as vulnerable. But within this room full of people, you'll also find those who feel vulnerable simply because the way that we do daily modern society is withdrawing from them. They're being left behind. They can no longer access what they may have taken for granted just a few years ago. Modern life has potentially destined many of them to a life of loneliness and isolation. It is these people, these are the people where I especially wanted to focus my thoughts this afternoon, because their vulnerability does not need to be accommodated or catered for. It is entirely avoidable. First, I'd like to thank my constituent Chris Ganninan, who has been the driving force behind Penwith 50 Plus Forum for many years. This remarkable organisation celebrates its 20th birthday this year, 2 decades of enhancing the quality of life for older people in Penwith. A vital part of improving their quality of life is through tackling loneliness, whether it's through driving people to church or social events, or starting a local radio station to keep them in touch. I remember as a district councillor at the time, when we started Penwith Radio, it's now Coast FM, and it has stuck to its core mission of just connecting the local community, giving really good local news and information and advice to people, and just reassuring people in their homes about their local area and the part that they play in it. In 3 weeks' time, the 50 Plus Forum will be hosting their Christmas lunch at Pengarth Day Centre for older people who would otherwise be spending Christmas alone. And I look back with fondness at the work of the 50 Plus Forum. Also, as a champion, I referred to my role on the council as a champion for children and young people on the Penwith District Council, with Chris Ganninan as a champion for older people. Together, we organised intergenerational events, such as car washes at the fire station in Penzance and at St Buryan Garage. I also supported efforts for the forum, the St Ives Forum Plus 50 Plus, to secure a minibus from the Department of Transport, which enables volunteers to ferry older people to meetings and appointments, making such a difference to their lived experience of many elderly people in my constituency. And Mr. Sharma, it's very appropriate that we to be holding this debate on loneliness among older people at this time, as Christmas can be the hardest time for those without family around them. According to Age UK, 1.6 million older people find Christmas Day the toughest of the year, with over 1 million elderly people feeling lonely over the festive season. Chris is among friends, as the British Red Cross has recently published a call to action on tackling loneliness and building community, which has been supported by over 90 sector partners, including Age UK, Mind and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. Together as a sector, they're calling for renewed national leadership on loneliness and connection, a dedicated minister for loneliness to lead a refreshed national strategy overseen by the Prime Minister and supported by a cross-governmental team. This refreshed national strategy would set out measurable objectives around loneliness to be delivered across government to address loneliness across all ages and among key at-risk groups, but also to be accountable for delivery on loneliness and the reporting by the UK government against its delivery of key strategic objectives on how government departments have contributed to tackling loneliness and building connection, and national monitoring on levels of loneliness. The Centre for Ageing Better is promoting a Good Home Hub, which would offer practical support, advice about financial support, home assessments, trustworthy signposting, particularly to trades and others that would work in the home, and to support to get the most efficient, appropriate housing. This kind of model would ensure proper engagement and care that can specifically address isolation and loneliness. Age UK are also fully engaged in the issues Chris and his 50 Plus Forum friends are campaigning on. Age UK have their own campaign, Offline and Overlooked, which is focusing on ensuring that older people who are not online have fair and equal access to public services. An example of how Age UK is trying to address the problem is the telephone friendship services, Mr Sharma, which matches older people with a volunteer to have a regular chat each week. Many older people say the calls are the highlight of their week, and their volunteer friend might be the only person they get to speak to. In 2022, Age UK supported 239,656 telephone friendship calls. 94% of people said that their well-being had improved since they started receiving telephone friendship calls. Age UK also runs Silverline Helpline, a 24-hour free confidential service for older people. The Silverline provides friendship, conversation and support for people aged 55 and over, especially for those who may be experiencing loneliness and isolation. In 2022, the Silverline Helpline handled 183,280 calls. But even this is at risk as we ditch copper landline and switch to Wi-Fi-only connectivity within our homes. There is no concern when the power supply is maintained. However, even this week, thousands of homes lost connectivity to electricity supply due to the severe weather. And I have some very concerned constituents, especially on the Lizard Peninsula, who fear being completely cut off when this technology is fully adopted. And I've yet to get an adequate response to inquiries I've raised to reassure people that they will not be left in the dark without a phone or any means of communication. Age UK's telephone friendship services, or the Silverline Helpline, is of no use at all if a power cut kills their telephone connection. Anyone can be lonely, but the elderly and disabled are particularly vulnerable. 1 in 3 people over the age of 75 say their loneliness is out of control. Life events such as the loss of a partner, combined with reduced mobility or managing on a fixed income, isolate people from social contact, which we know we all need to combat loneliness. These factors can converge and reinforce themselves. Loneliness affecting mental health, causing people to lose confidence in their ability to socialise or to feel overwhelmed in social settings and so become more lonely. Certainly, yeah.
I'm very grateful to my friend Vicky Wayne. Can I congratulate him on securing this debate on this really vital topic? As he will know, as a fellow member of the EFRA Select Committee, we published our report this year on rural mental health, and rural isolation is one of the real risk factors in terms of pressures on people's mental health. And we really stress the importance of connectivity, whether that's physical in terms of transport, but also virtual in terms of broadband, mobile phone signal. I've been privileged to welcome new bus vehicles to my constituency, the Border Rambler and the Fell Runner vehicle, provided by volunteer networks, providing a lifeline. Does my honourable friend agree with me that these rural bus networks are so important for us to support at central, local government and volunteer level? These are a lifeline for people and we should strongly support them.
Thomas.
I do support that, and the member's right to refer to our report from the EFRA Select Committee. In my constituency, we have a number of community-led bus schemes. Douglas Walcott would be an example of 2 buses, I think, that run and allow people to get to appointments and other things that they need to do in order to just to lead actually normal lives and to fulfil normal functions. But so often, and it's right to welcome broadband and all the things that connect homes and communities, but so often we rely on community organisations and volunteers to provide some of these things that are important that only communities can do, but they shouldn't be welcomed at the expense of things that maybe the state should continue to support and foster. In fact, to support that point, the Minister's own department has reported that loneliness can contribute to early death. The effect of loneliness on mortality is thought to be on a par with other public health priorities such as obesity and smoking, an increased risk of depression, low self-esteem, reported sleep problems, and increased stress response. And loneliness also creates greater risk of cognitive decline and the onset of dementia. All good reasons to be discussing this today and trying to find some solutions to address loneliness and isolation as much as we possibly can. We referred to the connectivity in terms of fibre and broadband. Some other older people are able to break this cycle through technology, and that's a fantastic thing. One 70-year-old who lived in my constituency discovered Zoom over lockdown, as many of us did, Now her family have to work around her busy schedule of Zoom calls to friends, old and new, all over the world. Evenings are out because she's talking to America. Early mornings are new friends in New Zealand. But this, and this is a big but, she was only able to do this because she had a grandson who was able to talk her through setting up Zoom. I'd like to meet him so he could help me on her computer, but also a daughter who could talk her through buying a computer. And I can't tell you how often I go to my 16-year-old just to try and set up Wi-Fi calling on my phone. For many elderly people, this is not the case. Social isolation leads to digital exclusion, and digital exclusion leads to further social isolation. Life becomes more difficult for the 2.4 million people aged 65 and over who do not use the internet, and the more they are cut off from everyday activity, the more lonely they become. The same is true of people with disabilities, who make up 60% of internet non-users. The government has not published a digital inclusion strategy since 2014, but so much of our lives are online now. We could all give anecdotal evidence, examples from our own lives, but the statistics show an increase in average monthly data usage of 731% since 2014 strategy was published. As many of us do more and more on our smartphones, it is easy to forget that over 3 million people aged 65 or over do not use a smartphone. 1.6 million don't even possess a mobile phone. And another point that tends not to get much airtime is the dramatic shift in the way that some letters and small parcel delivery companies have evolved their business. The delivery man or woman rarely takes time to wait for someone to answer the door or even check if someone's in. Instead, they use their technology to record their delivery and move on to the next address. Now, it's not the job of a delivery driver to look after the well-being of residents, but it's another aspect of human interaction lost to someone who may not see people from one day to the next. In the recent campaign, which we're all very familiar with, against ticket office closures on the rail network, the argument was, and we'll remember, that 86% of train tickets are now bought online. But we need to remember who is buying the other 14%, or as was the case in Penzance, who's buying the third of tickets that are sold in the ticket office. As one of my constituents wrote to me when Penzance ticket office was under threat, not everyone has a computer or mobile phone, especially in Cornwall, where mobile reception can be poor and many older people aren't computer savvy. The staff in Penzance are professional, kind and thoughtful. They demonstrate an understanding of levels of ability, both physical and mental. They are never impatient or unkind and frequently find a much better deal than friends do online. I will, certainly.
He's making an excellent speech, one that really strikes a chord with all of us. In my constituency, or in the north of Scotland, indeed the whole of North Scotland, the Bank of Scotland has announced it's going to remove all its mobile banks. And you can imagine what that means in terms of loneliness for old people and vulnerable living in my vast and scattered constituency. And that is why I will be raising this matter repeatedly in this place.
Thomas.
I really value and appreciate that intervention. I was in a meeting this morning around finances, and there was an audible desire to get everything on to be digital until we start thinking about the very people that we're caring for today, who actually are never going to be in that space, never going to be confident or comfortable or even feel, and I'll cover it later, that the risks around banking online are worth taking. And so as we race towards potentially a digital-only platform, it's our job and government's job to pause and see who misses out, who's left behind, and ensure that doesn't happen, which is as I opened up, my main concern is those people where we can completely avoid their loneliness and isolation by getting this right and being sensitive about how, while change is welcome, it must take people with us and accommodate those who can't jump on in the same way that maybe we can here. It was testimony around the ticket office given to train companies' consultation that persuaded government that it should ask the train operators to withdraw their proposals. People object to moving everything online. They may not even be able to do that. And there'll always be some people who will struggle with the internet and they will need to be catered for. What I would like is for the example of the Department of Transport to be followed across all government departments, and I would ask the Minister to take a lead on this. We have protected elderly people who can't navigate the internet but want to navigate a journey to see friends or relatives. Now we need to help them navigate their day-to-day lives. As public services increasingly move online, day-to-day essentials such as banking, making an NHS appointment, or even paying for parking become more difficult for those who are offline. All government services should be accessible to those who are not online, and at the moment, many councils provide no offline access to housing benefit, council tax reductions, rebates or blue badge applications. This is completely unacceptable, Mr Sharma. Last month I asked the Secretary of State for Transport whether he will be ensuring that people without internet access would be able to use DVLA services, such as paying road tax or renewing their driving licences, after the DVLA contract with the Post Office expires in March next year. The response was that the vast majority of licences were renewed online, and there was no guarantee that the contract would be renewed. I recognise there's a commercial discussion to be had, but the government should factor in the cost of not renewing that contract, the cost to older people whose social lives depend on being able to drive, as it does for many in rural constituencies, as we referred to earlier, such as mine, and the cost to the Post Office itself. 6 million customers access DVLA services across Post Office counters, and half of them pay in cash. Removing this service from post offices will not just impact vulnerable people, but also remove an important source of revenue for these vital, often very rural services which give access to people where access isn't otherwise available. Post offices have always been important to rural communities. They are becoming even more important as a backstop for those who cannot access essential cash, postal and government services elsewhere. Recent research found that only 47% of those aged 65 and over said they'd be able to find an alternative to access pensions and social benefits. The government should be doing everything it can to support the network. Access to cash is essential for elderly people, many of them who cannot or will not bank online. Even those older people who are comfortable with email feel uncomfortable with banking online or transferring money electronically, and we've heard of lots of examples from our constituents of fraud and scams which quite rightly concern more vulnerable people. Age UK's research showed that 27% of people over 65 manage their accounts via a branch or a physical location, such as a post office. Without banking services, those who do not bank online are cut adrift, less able to participate in society. So the rollout of banking hubs must increase in pace to avoid leaving communities to become banking deserts. At the moment, Link will only consider a banking hub after all commercial banks have left, as they have in St Ives and also Helston in my constituency. And I really want to take time to credit the Town Council in Helston and others for convincing Link to provide the town with a banking hub to open next year. But even when that opens, the town would have lost its bank for a whole year, the last of its banks for a whole year. There should be a more proactive approach, ensuring that no one is left without counter service. If nothing else, the government should be ensuring that all government services are easily accessible to everyone, even if they do not have access to the internet. No more so than in the NHS. Last week, I had an email from an 81-year-old constituent. His wife, who is not computer literate, received an email that she didn't understand. Luckily, he was able to cope, but he complained that he had to jump through hoops to download a document, even to understand what the email was about. Other older people who do not have a helpful spouse, and as my constituent wrote, I find it staggering that NHS in Cornwall insist on trying to communicate with patients via email, text messages and mobile phone, when some of us don't have a signal or are too old to deal with so-called improved services. Frankly, a simple telephone call would suffice, or at least if any form of communication contained a telephone number. And we all know here, because of the work we do for our constituents, improved services are not necessarily improved. Last month, the British Medical Quality and Safety Journal carried a report about the safety incidents resulting from remote consultations, missed, inaccurate or delayed diagnoses, delayed referrals and underestimates of severity or urgency. But even when remote consultations are medically justified, they do nothing to combat social isolation. A face-to-face consultation is more than an evidence-gathering exercise. It can be the only social interaction many older people have. And I met with a number of people from the Penwith 50 Plus Forum last Saturday, and one lady made a very important point, saying that when she went to see her GP face-to-face, he picked up other medical conditions which she was completely unaware of, which couldn't have been picked up on an online or telephone consultation. In the long run, social isolation will cost the NHS and the government more. Loneliness is associated with increased risk of high blood pressure, reduced immunity against infections, increasing the risk of coronary heart disease by 29% and the risk of stroke by 32%. We know that loneliness can be as dangerous as obesity or smoking, increasing the risk of early mortality by 26%. Now, I recognise, Mr. Sharma, that I have covered a lot of ground, and I believe it needs to be said if we are to avoid a very bleak existence for many of our older and vulnerable constituents. The government has the ability to fix this. As the government consults on eliminating smoking altogether, for example, will the Minister commit to making a similar aggressive approach to tackling loneliness? Will the Minister engage with Age UK, British Red Cross and others who are concerned about the current direction of travel and make a proper assessment of how many of our constituents are impacted by so many services moving online, especially for those over 65 years of age? I'm convinced, Mr. Sharma, and in conclusion, that the loneliness and vulnerability of many people, so many people face, would be eliminated if we responded adequately and effectively to this challenge. Thank you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I have to say this is the third debate in Westminster Hall I've answered today, so clearly the only minister on duty. But it does give me a personal achievement because it means that I've actually been in this room more often than the honourable member for Strangford today. I would like to thank my honourable friend for tabling this debate and to all honourable members for their thoughtful contributions today on this important issue. And it really is important to raise the profile of the issue of loneliness and isolation amongst elderly and vulnerable people. And I really do welcome the opportunity to talk about what we're trying to do in this area. And I'll start by stating that loneliness doesn't discriminate. The government is committed to ensuring that everyone can benefit from the power of meaningful connection, particularly those who are the most vulnerable members of our society. Loneliness is a complex issue that we can only address in partnership and across sectors. And I'd like to celebrate the meaningful work that's being done within many of our constituencies to further and encourage those social connections. Much of this work is carried out by the civil society sector, for example, Age UK that we've heard about and has been referenced today for the excellent work that they do, and those organisations that are vital in this mission to tackle loneliness, and of course the Joe Cox Foundation has done tremendous amounts of work on this important area. And research that we have commissioned shows that those who are most vulnerable and at risk of loneliness include those who live alone, disabled people, LGBT people, young people, and that's why we focused this year very heavily on a campaign for students going to university for the first time, and on those who are on lower incomes, to name a few. But the Honourable Gentleman rightly raised the issue of young carers. I think also I want to think about those young people who are in care. I was really struck at the APPG meeting when we heard from one of the young people who was in care. The most heartbreaking thing she said was, I'm never going to be in a place that long enough that it's not worth me even trying to form friendships. That shouldn't be something we should be hearing from young people. However, people of all backgrounds can experience loneliness at any time of life. There are also certain life events which can trigger loneliness, like retirement, divorce and bereavement. If people feel this way always or often, it can have a serious impact on physical and mental health and well-being. Now, government action to tackle loneliness amongst the most vulnerable in our society is driven by the 3 key objectives that were set out in the World First Tackling Loneliness Strategy of 2018. That's to reduce the stigma of loneliness by building the national conversation, to drive a lasting shift so that relationships and loneliness are considered by organisations across society, and to improve the evidence base, making a compelling case for ongoing action. To reduce the stigma on loneliness, the government has a national communications campaign which has reached millions of people to raise awareness about loneliness and provide advice on what people can do to help themselves and others if they are feeling lonely. Last year, our campaign became part of the Department of Health and Social Care's Better Health, Every Mind Matters campaign to provide advice on what people can do to help themselves and others if they're feeling lonely. And this year we published research exploring the prevalence of stigma associated with loneliness in England. This research found that there are 3 types of stigma associated with loneliness: self-stigma, perceived social stigma, and actual social stigma. One of the key findings was that older people feel stigma around loneliness is driven by concerns that they will be a burden to their family and lose their independence. For example, some older people felt that their role as a parent meant that they were not meant to seek support from their children. This research is informing our work on building the national conversation on loneliness. And during the Loneliness Awareness Week this summer, I shared my own personal experience of loneliness with the Times and the Sun newspapers. I have to say I've been overwhelmed by the response that I've had from people from right across the globe, revealing that despite awareness raised during the pandemic, it is still unusual to speak up in public about loneliness. And I hope that my small contribution will play a small part in helping to reduce stigma around loneliness, because I believe that if I can't talk about it, then how can I get everybody else started to talk about it as the Minister responsible? We are committed to driving a lasting shift in government and across organisations in society to ensure that loneliness is considered as a matter of course in all policy making. Since the publication of the strategy in 2018, the government and its partners have invested almost £80 million in tackling loneliness. And at local level, we've supported community projects like songwriting groups in Devon and dance classes in Bedfordshire, which benefits vulnerable older people in the community. And we've also supported health and wellbeing projects such as online chat services in Durham and projects that support education, climate and the environment like nature walks in Lambeth. We've also taken nationwide actions such as expanding the social prescribing programme, which connects people to activities and services in their communities to meet their wellbeing needs. This helps to tackle loneliness at its source and reduce the impact on public services. Now, while digital technology can be a great resource to connect people, this opportunity is not equally available to all, as we've heard from many here today. And that is why, during the pandemic, we recognised that importance, and DCMS invested 34 million to help the sector adapt and so that we could get more people online by giving them the support, the devices and data and skills that they need to be able to connect. And we're continuing to work closely with stakeholders to understand the challenges that digital inclusion presents, and I will raise these continually with my colleagues to consider how best the services that we can provide are more mindful of this. But this must be a cross-sector effort, and I applaud companies such as Sky for their Sky Cares initiative that incorporates befriending into their roles of their call centre staff, and Barclays for their Digital Eagles initiative that is visiting existing community groups to bring digital banking skills to those who need it most. And we're committed to tackling loneliness amongst all. And in 2023, we launched the up to £30 million for the Know Your Neighbourhood Fund to create volunteering opportunities and help reduce loneliness. This funding will go to new and existing activity in 27 of the most deprived areas. I recently visited one of these in Hull, where Age UK were running a befriending service, just creating those volunteering opportunities for younger people to befriend older people and make those older people who've been feeling so isolated feel that they are part of that wider community. And just a few weeks ago, I visited Waterside Leisure Centre on Canvey Island, one of the recipients of funding from Sport England that is designed to bring investment into local communities, and I had the chance to take part in an exercise class with elderly people who were there, many of whom were coming together simply because it was an opportunity to be active, but also to meet with other people. And in 2021, we launched the Tackling Loneliness Hub as a dedicated online forum for individuals and organisations working to tackle loneliness, to connect them with each other. Members can develop relationships, learn and upskill from events and workshops, and share the latest research and insights on what works. Organisations represented include Age UK, the English Football League Trust, the Co-op Foundation and the British Red Cross. Membership now stands at over 600 organisations from the public, private, academic and charity sectors. It is worth highlighting the fact that we are recognised as world leaders, and I've been pleased to welcome and have conversations with people from Sweden, from Japan, Finland and the United States, and we continue to work across countries to learn from each other. Conscious of time and the need for my honourable friend to be able to sum up, but let me just say that we recognise that loneliness can affect all people, regardless of their background. We know that there are specific issues around each of the individual sets of people that we're talking about, but we will continue to work very closely right across government. I have to say, I brought ministers from 11 different departments together, and we will continue to work together so that we do not lose momentum and that we do everything we can to tackle loneliness in this country. And as others have said, as we approach Christmas, if we see someone alone, just stop and say hello. It might be the only gift they get this Christmas, but let's then continue that in January, February, March and for the rest of the year.
Derek Thomas to wind up.
I thank all colleagues for their contributions. And actually, we have covered a huge amount of ground, and I think we've really been able to demonstrate our understanding and care for people that are lonely, of any age and any demographic and wherever they live. And it's heartening, actually, to hear what's going on to try and address that. Can I particularly thank the Minister for his response and the fact that this is cross-government. I think one thing that concerns people is the fact that different departments have different responsibilities, and his leadership, getting all those ministers together, really encourages. I know that most of the cake, tea and cake, coffee and cake I've eaten as an MP has been in small community groups where they're trying to address this situation. Let's demonstrate that we're on their side, that the government and all parties are determined to try and address this and make loneliness and isolation, where possible, a thing of the past.
The question is that this House has considered loneliness and isolation in elderly and vulnerable people. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.